Hello, hello. Uta Hagen here of Trans Widow Uta Hagen YouTube channel with a few more roses. I couldn't believe it. And behind me here are what's left of the coreopsis, which originally, when I grew them from that seed 2 years ago, were bright orange. So I'm going to get the orange flash again in the spring when from it's Johnny's Seeds, it's called. I'm trying to find. Oh, that's a good one. Okay. So, um, this is all very interesting. Things are happening in a direction that I'm very happy about, meaning that on November 4th, the US House Committee on Oversight and something, it's called the House Oversight Committee, sent a letter to the doctor who is the head of the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, and said they are initiating an investigation into the $9.7 million study that Dr. Johanna Olson-Kennedy was granted in order to basically try to replicate what we know as the Dutch study, which resulted in what we are calling the Dutch protocols. And I don't know why anyone would try to replicate that study, actually, because it only ended up with 33 subjects finishing the last part of it. And this is real arrogance on the part of De Vries, Steensma, and Cohen-Kettenis. And I have to go back, I think, thank you, Eliza Mondegreen, who has the Gender Hacked Substack blog. She had a quote from Cohen-Kettenis, I think it was on her blog, where Cohen-Kettenis is saying what she does is ask little kids if there was a fairy who could wave a magic wand and change something about your body, is there anything that you would like to change? And this is utterly ridiculous because a child who is, I don't know, any age really, will take that as fantasy play and might say, I would like to have wings. I would like to be able to fly. I would like to spend a day as a boy. I would like to spend a day as a girl. Or I would like to be 3 inches taller. Or I would like to have a certain kind of better, more in tune, perfect pitch voice. I mean, this is an utterly ridiculous question. And I think it's very interesting that a person who merely has something like 1 2/3 master's degrees. I have a master's degree in early childhood education, and about 2/3 of a master's degree in special education. I did want to go back and finish that master's degree at one point, and Brooklyn College had the temerity to say to me, well, you would have to start over because you took these courses so long ago, meaning like 10 years before. And I thought, wow, you are really a money-making enterprise here. All right, so I'm just going to quickly read my letter, which is regarding exactly these terrible studies and bad interpretations, bad so-called science. You can't even call it science. And this is the letter that I'm sending to Representative Nancy Mace, Republican of South Carolina, Harriet Hageman, Republican of, I think, Wyoming, and Dan Crenshaw, Republican of, I want to say Oklahoma, maybe. And I did also send it to my House representative, who is a Democrat. And I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want to reveal that much about my location. I also sent it to Ocasio-Cortez. And because, they're ruining kids' lives. So this I wrote to Yale. It's on my utahagengrasswidow.wordpress.com blog. And I suggest that you copy pieces of it and print it out and send it to your House of Representatives or your local health department. I did something that I regarded as kind of brave. I called this mental health association in my county, and I just made a statement. I said, you don't need to take my number. You don't need to call me back, but I'm a trans widow. My ex-husband says not only that he's female, but that he's me, the mother of our children. And I just want you to know you are doing women a disservice when you force them to say she and her and something about the husband's new fancy name, Isabella or whatever. It's usually a couple of names like Isabella Alexandria or something like that. They really like to, fill up that glass. So this is addressed to the president of Yale, and I think this is useful because she's new since July over at Yale. And this Dr. McNamara is affiliated with Yale and has this integrity project, which I would call the lack of integrity project. And she published something claiming or implying that it was peer-reviewed and so on by, say, some of those Yale entities, such as the medical school or Department of Psychology or something. And it wasn't. Okay. So here I'm writing. Dear President Maury McGinnis, you have a group publishing pseudoscience at Yale, using Yale's reputation to cause the public to believe these claims are peer-reviewed and, in quotes, settled science. Because Dr. McNamara's career depends on the continuance of gender-affirming care, despite the growing change of direction in all of Scandinavia, the UK, and France so far. And guess what? As of last spring, in the Netherlands, some of the elected officials are saying that De Vries Stiesma and Cohen-Kettenis need to be investigated, and they need to stop having the Dutch protocols. So we'll see how that plays out. Okay, so they have a conflict of interest. Their continued publication of pseudoscience, this is McNamara's group, will eventually damage Yale's reputation. Dr. Miriam Grossman, child psychologist, testified before Congress at the same hearing as Dr. McNamara. This was in the summer of 2023. Dr. Grossman presented peer-reviewed and scientifically grounded factual information regarding the constant controversies in the history of transgender diagnoses, treatment through affirmative care, in quotes, using gonadatrophin agonists, that is, puberty blockers, as a block to normal human puberty in confused and psychiatrically ill children. I am a trans widow, the ex-wife of a transitioned, in quotes, husband, and collect the only data in the world on our experiences, unfortunately most commonly of the domestic abuse, that is, coercive control, by the husbands who drift into female identifications. Not reported is the fact that many of them detransition a few years later. And in fact, I think there were at least 4, in a cohort of 64 ex-husbands. I'm not really collecting this data on the ex-husbands. I am collecting the data on trans widows. Okay, that many detransition a few years later after their families are split and children of these men have been traumatized. Again, I collect the only data in the world on these sons and daughters of men who, in quotes, transitioned. Dr. McNamara's reliance on captured language and an indoctrinated mindset prevents these facts from coming out. The organization known as Trans Journalists Association Style Guide, in fact, thrusts the non-reporting of flaws in the diagnostic process with its radical treatments directly into the free press, damaging our very democracy. I feel like I need to make this more elegantly worded because I just am trying to really reiterate the fact that when you censor the press, when you have a captured press using ideological language you do not get out the actual facts. And we have so many doctors who feel utterly censored and fear for their jobs if they speak out, saying, this isn't the way medicine is supposed to be practiced. Doctors, you should be saying this. The following excerpt from segm.org, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, below is responding to Dr. McNamara's disingenuous publications, which are not peer-reviewed. She publishes as if peer-reviewed by Yale Medical School or some other Yale entity. So this is the statement, and it has to do with that McNamara published a so-called debunk article regarding the Cass review, the review with which Dame Dr. Hilary Cass published after 4 years of study in the UK, and she found that all of the studies that promote so-called affirming care, promote puberty blockers, and promote teenagers starting to ingest wrong sex hormones are very poor quality, okay? So, and McNamara and I guess it was Jack Turbin or somebody published this countering statement, and it was reported in the press as though, oh, at Yale they have debunked Cass. Not true. Okay, so this is from SEGM, Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. You can find it at segm.org. The claims in this online-only, non-peer-reviewed paper by McNamara et al. Attracted significant international attention in no small measure due to the imprimatur of Yale University, which hosts the so-called Integrity Project, under whose auspices the paper was posted. Although a disclaimer was eventually added to that the work did not represent Yale's views, the narrative that Yale debunked the Cass review took root in some circles, leading to a surprising decision by the British Medical Association to publicly critique the Cass review. In response to growing national and international attention to the McNamara et al. Paper, which it cites in it's a publication called Archives of Disease in Childhood, an international pediatric journal from the British Medical Journal and the Royal College of Pediatricians and Child Health published a peer-reviewed analysis scrutinizing the claims in McNamara's paper. This newly published analysis, co-authored by several of the UK's leading clinicians, including the past president of the Royal College of Pediatrics, concluded that the paper by McNamara et al. Is not a credible scientific effort, but rather an attempt to influence U.S. litigation while masquerading as scientific critique. That means we know they're all afraid of the detransition or malpractice lawsuits. I continue. The trans child does not comport with the 4 stages of child development outlined by Piaget, now enshrined as settled science in a web page on the National Institutes of Health website. The study used as so-called foundation for use of gonadatrophin agonists on children is the Dutch study De Vries, Steens, McCone, Ketnes, 2014. The results cannot be considered valid due to the fact that 2 deaths occurred while the concluding number of subjects had dwindled to 33. Now, the story is that it started with 70, 15 dropped out, nobody asked why, then 2 died, now we're down to 53, and suddenly 20 less, yes, 20 less finish with the survey. I would have liked to go into all the details about the problems with that survey, which was a separate sex-segregated survey for males and females, same one as from the beginning, and then the exit survey was the same one at the end, except they switched who got the survey. That is the so-called trans women who had gone through hormones and surgeries got the female version, asking them questions about menstrual cramps, which of course we all know that, in quotes, trans women do not get menstrual cramps or menstrual periods. And the question for trans men, so-called, that is natal females, included questions about nighttime emissions, commonly known as wet dreams. Of course, so-called trans men do not in their dreams ejaculate and have nighttime emissions. I work so hard to always be matter of fact and clinical here. Oh, okay. Dr. McNamara continues to promote gonadatrophin agonists in teens despite known risks of bone demineralization and the recent scandal with Dr. Olson-Kennedy's refusal to publish an NIH-funded study on 95 teens put on puberty blockers because it had significant negative results. Actually, 25% of the subjects had worse mental health outcomes, and the number of subjects being only 95. And as a matter of fact, we do have to ask, were there any walkaways, like the 15 who walked away from the Dutch study that was published in 2014? For political reasons, Dr. Olson-Kennedy held these results back. I'm in contact with several members of the GOP majority House of Representatives, and they plan to call both Dr. Olson-Kennedy and Dr. McNamara back to testify in congressional hearings. Now, I only know about their investigation into Olson-Kennedy, but I do believe McNamara will be called back, partially because Yale University gets public government monies. And so, therefore, that's a part of this whole thing of government monies being misused for studies that are not using actual scientific methods, and they are not correctly interpreting their actual results. Okay. Dr. McNamara and her cohorts, Jack Turbin and Johanna Olson-Kennedy, have never outlined plans of care for those subjects harmed by their practices. This is the detransitioners. And they remain open to a series of medical malpractice lawsuits, such as those initiated by detransitioners Chloe Cole, Prisha Mosley, Jane Doe versus University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Christina Heinemann. Of course, I could have gone on for another page with all of the other lawsuits, such as Richie Herron and Kira Bell. And I'd have to go look in my notes for all the rest of them. You can find those if you scroll back through all of my posts at utahagengrasswidow.wordpress.com. So I continue to Dear President McGinnis, you must ask Dr. McNamara if she denigrates detransitioners as most in her field do. You, President McGinnis, are a part of this medical scandal as the institution of Yale University participates in possibly the most significant medical malpractice scandal in the history of medicine, according to Dr. Miriam Grossman in her congressional testimony in the summer of 2023. Please present this to Dr. McNamara as it is prior notice, a medical malpractice concept. Dr. McNamara and Yale have prior notice of the higher rate of detransition as well as the current malpractice suits from detransitioners. And this all has to do with they are unable to give the information to these patients so that these patients can actually do informed consent. I happen to be a retired science teacher and have helped 5 young people leave off the mental and emotional confusion of cross-sex ideation through wellness practices. Typically for teens, the exposure to pornography plays a role in the origin of this ideation. For younger children, it is generally a passing phase and a program focusing on positive reward for helpful behavior, conflict resolution strategies for sibling rivalries, and a refocus of parental attention to the child's needs, not the Munchausen parents making glory and musical adaptations of their child's so-called transition and putting it up on TikTok and Instagram. Okay. 4 of the 5 I've assisted never looked back in more than 15 years. I have asked people who live in the same neighborhood as those 4 children who early on had a few weeks or a few months of expressing the desire that they wish they had been born in a different body. And so I've just followed up on them through people who have observed them mostly in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and they were not dressing like the opposite sex or showed absolutely no evidence of going through some kind of transition involving hormones or sex trait modification surgeries. Okay, the 5th is just recently desisted. That's our Paul. And in his words, I don't have much more to say about it because I don't feel that way anymore. And I was pleased that he just didn't have time to communicate with me this week. That just about sums it all up. And another point that I would like to make is, they should have done a survey of older teachers and asked them about how often have you seen in your 30-year career or something that spanned from the 1970s until the 1990s, have you seen children who expressed this cross-sex ideation, and did they drop it after a time? Because I really don't think you'll find very many of us older teachers who had children continuing this throughout the whole year or into the next year. And then I just gave the resources, from segm.org, from Michael Biggs, who wrote a critique of the Dutch study, and also the Swedish death records study. Oh, I think I skipped that. Yes, the Swedish study of death records, Cecilia Dana et al., Karolinska Institute, 2011, further evidences the dangers of surgical transition. The death by suicide rate years after vaginoplasties and phalloplasties, both in quotes, carried out on 388 so-called trans patients between 1973 and 2003 in Sweden was, for natal females, 40 times higher. That is to say, for natal females, the suicide rate was 40 times higher than age-matched controls. These are death records. It's all the records of what was the cause of death of age-matched trans patients, so-called, with the controls who, in their captured language, are called cis, CIS. Okay. And it's 19 times higher for the natal males. Now, I might have already read this, but I feel like it's worth rereading that particular thing. And then I wrote, why Dr. McNamara ignores this statistically significant study is astounding. So that's my letter. You can go to utahagengrasswidow.wordpress.com and copy whatever parts of this you wish to, and take out my personal writings and put in whatever your personal experiences are. And I suggest that you send it to your local Department of Education, your local mental health bodies, and any of your elected representatives. And I'm actually really going to plant a great deal